Hello students, this is a short video about how to answer judgment questions. This is a little bit longer than a lot of the other videos because there is more to discuss and more to explain, because this is a 16-mark question with additional SPAG marks. This question is on medicine and Henry VIII. It will go through a plan, then it will look at an example paragraph, then it will discuss how to build in an argument, and then there'll be a few practice questions that you can have a look at should you want to. So this is a short video about the 16-mark question. It is on medicine and it's on Henry. The 16-mark question on Germany is slightly different, so there's a separate video for this one. There is also SPAG marks that are available for this question as well. So this is a question that you need to spend plenty of time on, and you also need to have an opinion or an argument. So we're going to look at this one, okay, which says Edward Jenner made his discovery due to the actions of the government. How far do you agree with this statement? Now, they're probably going to ask you one of two different types of questions. They're either going to ask you a question that is to do with what's called an iceberg question, which this one is, because what they've done is they've given you a reason. Okay, so the question is about Edward Jenner, and they've said that Edward Jenner has made this discovery because of the actions of the government. And you will need to bring up other reasons why Edward Jenner made his discovery in order to reach a judgment about whether Jenner made his discovery because of the government. The other type of question that they can ask is what's called a on the one hand, on the other hand question. And those are quite straightforward because they'll say how successful was something, how important was something, how significant was something, and you can argue for and against. So largely this plan can be used for both types. Obviously for these ones where we have a factor given, okay, we have our factor given here as government, and this is agreeing with the question, and then we need to come up with reasons that disagree with the question, or other factors. If you had on the one hand, on the other, you'd try to come up with 2 points that would agree that something was successful, and then 2 points that would disagree. Now we're going to talk about the introduction and the conclusion at the end, but we're just going to talk about how we would plan it first of all. Okay, so they've given us government, so we would normally start with that. So we need to think about how the government helps Edward Jenner. And we know that there's a lot of negative reaction to the idea of vaccination. So people were scared of vaccination. And the reason that they were scared is that they feared turning into a cow. You may have seen the famous Gilroy cartoon where these people are sitting around and kind of cows are sprouting out of their faces. There was a lot of fear about this. So after 1871, the government made vaccination compulsory. So you had to be vaccinated against smallpox. Okay. Then we've got 3 other factors. So there are icons here already to help us. So we could talk about science and tech. We could talk about individuals. And we could talk about chance. But we could also talk about other things if we wanted to. Okay, it doesn't really matter. They just want you to bring up some other things. So examples of science and tech is that Jenner used a scientific method. Although it would be frowned upon today, he does test this on James Phelps. When it works, this is when he formally publishes his findings. And he formally published his findings in 1798. So we could talk about science and technology as an approach helping Jenner to make his discovery. Then we could talk about Jenner as an individual, that he is naturally curious in all sorts of things. If you watch the video, it talked about, you know, him having all these other interests like flute playing and being able to show an interest in the nesting patterns of cuckoos and all kinds of random stuff. So he's really interested in science particularly, but other things as well, but particularly science. He is also coming up with an idea that is safer. Okay. This is going to be a really important part of his idea. The previous ideas, which was Lady Mary and inoculation, which is where you give someone a mild case of smallpox to protect them from getting a serious case. This had a 2 to 3% fatality rate. Cowpox is not a dangerous disease. So this is another important thing. Okay, he's able to find this much safer idea. And then we could also talk about the concept of chance, that Jenna had heard that smallpox prevented cowpox. Oh, sorry, we're writing cowpox prevented smallpox. Okay, and he wanted to test it. He's not looking for this. He's not particularly interested in smallpox, but he hears this rumour and he decides to sort of test it out. So now we've got 4 different reasons. We need to think about what helps Jenna make his discovery. Because remember, these are the 4, this is the key words here. Okay, we're not being asked generally about smallpox, we're being asked about what helped Jenna to make his discovery. So if we think about government, actually government helps him, or helps his idea become more accepted, but it doesn't really help him make his discovery. He's already made the discovery by the time the government get involved. So these little temperature gauges are just for us to think about how important these different factors are. Then if we think about science and tech, well, this is quite an important factor, isn't it? Because here we have him using important scientific methods to prove his theory. And then we could say individuals is quite important. Okay, the fact that his idea is safer is important, but doesn't necessarily explain why he's able to make his discovery. And then we also have the factor of chance, and the chance factor is probably also very important, because this is why he stumbles across smallpox and cowpox and the relationship between them in the first place. So when we're going to argue which one is the most important, we're probably going to have to argue one of these 2. Okay, so it's either going to be science and technology and chance. Now, when we come to write our introduction and our conclusion, what we need to think about, and we'll demonstrate this in a moment, is what's called the GST structure. Okay, so introductions start with a general statement. Okay, so you could define what vaccination is. Then we need to have a specific statement. Okay, so we would have some sort of statement about Jenna. And then we would have our thesis. Okay, and our thesis would be our argument. So this opening part gets divided into 3 different sections. Okay, so we're thinking about our general being a statement about vaccination. We are thinking about our specific being a statement specifically about Jenna. And then our final sentence is our thesis. We don't want to write huge amounts for our introductions. And quite a lot of the time people get, they write too much and they don't really make a clear argument. Because this is where the top marks are going to be, is for making a clear argument. If we go down to our conclusion, what we're going to try and do is give our opinion. That is our thesis, our argument, what we think. That's what we start that sentence with. Okay, so in the same way that we ended our introduction with our opinion, we need to start our conclusion with our opinion. Then what we want to do is we want to explain why it is the most important. Okay, so explain why it is the most important. Lots of people will just explain why it is important, but we want to explain why it is the most important. So this means we have to try and compare the factor we've chosen to the other factors. Okay, rather than just saying this is, government was important because of this reason, or science and technology was important because of this reason, we need to make a really clear judgment. And then you want to finish with a final really clear sentence that makes your opinion totally clear. You need to try and make sure that you are sticking with the same argument all the way through. So this is what they're going to award top marks for. It's not just all your knowledge that you have about Jenna, but it's also going to be for picking one and arguing why it is the most important. So it's not just a random thing. It's not something you feel deep inside your heart. You look at the options, you look at your factors, and you decide what is the easiest argument to make about which one is the most important. And these little temperature gauges can help you think about that. Okay, so compare them against each other. The next short video is going to go on to show you an example paragraph. So this is a plan, this is still of the plan that we've just done. So you've got the question on the top. Down here we've got our 4 different factors, or 4 different paragraphs to challenge this statement about whether the government helped Edward Jenner make his discovery, with our key notes. And then over here we have our temperature gauges that give us a sense of how important these factors were. And then there is also space for arguments, for introduction and for your conclusion. if you got a different type of question that asked you to what extent something was successful or something was important, you'd look to have 2 statements that agree or 2 points that agree and then 2 points that disagree. Okay, so when writing these 16-mark questions, the first thing I would suggest, which is going to sound really weird, but is that you don't write your introduction first. Okay, I would never write an introduction first, particularly in an exam. I would leave a little bit of space, say about that much space, you can see the question, and I would just start writing the main part of my answer. And the reason I wouldn't start with my introduction is sometimes it's hard to know exactly what you're going to say to start with, particularly in an exam when you haven't had much time to think. So I've got my plan that we made earlier, okay, it's just over here to the side. And so I'm going to start with the first paragraph that is about government. And like all of the paragraphs we write in history, the first paragraph needs to have an opening sentence. Now, before, when we have been doing explain questions and kind of those sorts of more simple questions, we would start with one reason, another reason, finally. You can still use those starters. But also bear in mind that we are trying to craft an argument. Okay, so we could start with, it could be argued. Okay, it's been suggested, it could be suggested that, any kind of variation of that would be fine. So the first thing we want to see is an opening sentence, and we're going to do the same thing as what we've done before. Okay, so the first thing is to use the words from the question. Okay, it could be argued that Edward Jenner made his discovery because, and this is where we have to make a point, because of science, because of the role of the government. So that would be a perfectly good opening sentence because it has our using the words from the question, Edward Jenner made his discovery, and then we have the point being made. And this time the point is being made around the government. So the next thing we need to do is we have to try and include precise detail. And remember, when we talk about precise detail, we mean names, we mean dates, we mean events, we mean terms, and we mean statistics if we have them. Now, you don't need to try and put all of those things in every paragraph, okay? That's not going to work. But it's across the whole of the piece that we're looking for, okay? So you might not have these things for everything, but you should have them for some of those. So we then need to go on to explain why the government was important. There was a lot of opposition from doctors as Jenner was using an animal disease to protect humans from smallpox. This could be seen through cartoons which showed people turning into cows. As a result, people did not get the vaccine. This led to the government making it compulsory in 1871. So we're going to go through this and we're going to mark on where we have used some good precise detail. So we have quite a little bit here about the animal disease and people being fearful, and we've written about the cartoons. We could improve this a little bit though if we add in here by James Gilray. So that would give us a name. Add that bit in. And then we've got the date and the government making it compulsory Okay, so you can see that there's a small amount of precise detail in here. We're not looking for tons and tons, we're just looking for little bits. Then the last thing we need to do is link back to the question. Okay, and this would be the end of our first paragraph. So remember, we're not trying to write huge amounts. We've got to do 3 or 4 of these paragraphs, so they're not going to be hugely long. This explains how Jenner was able to make his discovery. Okay, so we're using the same idea, linking back to the question using the same words as are in the actual question itself. So this is a still of the paragraph, the example paragraph that has been written, so you can have a little bit more of a closer look at it if you would like. So in order to turn this from a basic explanation of several reasons why to something that would get an 8 or around there, you would need to add in argument. So you don't need to write more, you just need to think harder, because you've got to have a really good argument. You've got to have a really clear reason why something is more important than the others. And this comes down to your introduction and your conclusion. And it will also come down to the little bits that you can add in. So you could just start by writing your 4 factors, your 4 paragraphs, leave some space at the end of each paragraph, a couple more lines than you really need, and just focus on your sort of factual explanations of those reasons. And that gives you a chance to sort of think about, refine your argument. Then you need to go back to your introduction, and we're going to do the same thing as we did before. So we're going to think about our GST structure, because a lot of the time people write too much for introductions, but don't really say anything. So we want to get away from that. So the first thing we want is we want to have a general statement. Okay, and so we're really going to try and cut this down to basically 3 sentences. Okay, we're not writing huge amounts for introductions and conclusions. Some people will waffle on half this page and they won't have really made anything like a clear statement, clear idea. This is what we're doing. We're setting out our argument here. So a general statement. Okay, vaccination is an important method to prevent disease, as it trains your immune system to defeat infection. So this would be our general statement. Okay, here we are just literally talking about vaccination. We're not even talking about Edward Jenner yet. Then we go on to our specific. So now we do need to talk about Jenner. Okay, so Edward Jenner developed the first effective vaccine for smallpox by using cowpox in 1798. Okay, so having had a specific sentence, having had a general sentence, we then have our specific sentence. Okay, so something about Edward Jenner. This still doesn't really ask the question, because the question isn't what do you know about Edward Jenner. The question is, to what extent did the government help him make his discovery? So now we have to come up with our thesis. Okay, and this is the T on the GST structure. And the thesis basically just means your argument. Okay, what do you think is the most important factor? So this is where we have to start thinking. So we would write, probably, we know they're suggesting government, so we have to agree or disagree. And if we go back to our little plan that we had, okay, with our little temperature gauges, we can see that government was one of the least important ones. So we're not going to be arguing that government was the most important. It would seem unlikely that government was the most important factor in helping Jenner make his discovery. Okay, so we've used the words from the question and we've said whether we think government was or was not important. And we've said the government is not important. Okay, it seems unlikely that government was the most important factor. So if that's what we're going to argue, we have to now put forward our opinion. Okay, so it is far more likely that chance played a more important role in Jenner's discovery. Okay, so what we have here is a opinion. Okay, and then we're going to use the rest of our answer to make this argument. So it's not kind of schizophrenic, switching from one view to another all the time. You're making one consistent argument, but you're looking at other factors. So what we might do is we might go back to this paragraph that we've just written, and where we've written back our link, okay, we might then also add in some of our thesis, some of our argument. Okay, so we might add in, but it was not the most important factor, as Jenner had already made his discovery. Okay, so we're adding in more thesis down here. So what we want to see is the ends of your paragraphs have links to the question, but also we're trying to link back constantly to our argument, arguing about why it is or why it's not the most important. So now the final little bit we need to do is our conclusion. So we have our introduction, we have our main part of our answer with our 4 sections, and then we would need to write our conclusion. And the thing with the conclusion is we really want to focus on not just what the most important factor was, but why it was the most important. So we would start again with a thesis. Okay, so we'd start with our argument. Therefore, it would seem that the factor of chance was the most important reason why Jenner made his discovery. Okay. Now, what a lot of people would then do is they would go on to tell me again all the reasons why chance was important. But you've already done that because you'd have already written a paragraph about chance. What you need to do is you need to tell me why chance was the most important reason. And for that to work, for that to happen, we need to see direct comparison between factors. Okay, so it's not just enough to tell me that chance was important. We need to specify why chance is more important than the others. Okay, so chance is more important than the role of government, as the government only enforced vaccination after 1871, this was almost 100 years, 800 years after Jenner's discovery. Okay, chance is also more important than science and tech, as it only enabled Jenner to prove his discovery, not make it in the first place. Okay, whilst the factor of individualism is important. Jenna was not particularly interested in it, and only investigated it after and I would deliberately put this word in, a chance discovery of a potential link between smallpox and cowpox. Okay, so all of this, all you are doing is comparing the factors against each other. We are not just saying all the things you've already said. Okay, we are trying to make a clear link. Then to finish, you need to make a obvious judgment. Okay, quite a lot of the time people wander off the point by the end, or say something that suggests they've changed their mind a little bit. Your last sentence needs to be really, really clear. And you need to pick one thing. Okay, you can't say it's a combination of different things. You've got to pick one thing. Okay, so this is why chance was the most important factor in helping Jenna make his discovery. Okay, so you finish with a clear judgment so the examiner knows what you are talking about. And this is a still of the final completed piece of work. So we have our introduction, we have our first paragraph, and then we'd probably have a couple more paragraphs, and then over here we have our conclusion.